Give her back to me. The voice rose from beneath the lake, ancient and cold, like stone learning to speak, and the woman standing on the shore tightened her grip on the bundle wrapped against her chest, shaking her head even though no one could see her in the dark. This is the story of a woman the world decided to forget, a woman who found something impossible in the water one morning before the sun rose, and what that gift cost her will stay with you long after you stop watching. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments and don't forget to subscribe because this story is one you'll want to share. Now let's go back to where it all began. There was a time when her name was spoken with warmth, when people turned their heads just to watch her pass, when mothers whispered to their sons, "That one, that's the kind of wife you pray for," and she walked through the village square with her head high and her smile easy, the kind of woman the earth seemed to shape with extra care, skin like honey in sunlight, eyes that caught the light and held it, a laugh that made even strangers feel welcome. She married well, everyone said so, married a man whose family had land and status, a man whose voice carried weight at the village council, a man who looked at her on their wedding day like she was the only woman the gods had ever made. The drums beat until the stars came out that night and the dancers' feet wore grooves into the dust and the elders blessed them with prayers so old no one remembered where they came from, and for the first year everything was exactly what she dreamed it would be. But then the months passed and her belly stayed flat. Then a year passed and still nothing. Then 2 years, then 3, and the way her husband looked at her started to change, the warmth draining out of his voice 1 degree at a time until the day he came home from the market with another woman walking 3 steps behind him, young, round-faced, already swollen with his child, and he didn't even meet his first wife's eyes when he said, "A man needs sons." That was all. No apology. No explanation. Just those 4 words, and from that day forward her world got smaller and colder and quieter until she became a shadow moving through her own house. She watched from doorways as the new wife's belly grew, as the babies came one after another, as the hut filled with noise and laughter and the kind of chaos that only children can make, and every morning she woke before anyone else, wrapped herself in the dark, and walked alone to the river to fetch water because no one else would help her and she refused to let anyone say she was lazy or slow or bitter. She refused to give them that satisfaction. But inside, in the place no one else could see, something was breaking. It was still dark the morning everything changed, so dark she could barely see her own hands as she balanced the clay pot on her head and made her way down the narrow path to the water's edge, the stars overhead cold and distant, the air heavy with that particular silence that comes just before dawn when even the insects hold their breath. She reached the riverbank and crouched low, dipping the pot beneath the surface, and that's when she heard it, faint at first, almost buried under the sound of the current, a sound like a baby crying. She froze, the pot half full, water dripping from the rim, and listened. There it was again, weak, desperate, coming from somewhere close. She turned her head slowly, scanning the darkness, but the riverbank was empty, just reeds and smooth stones and the black glass surface of the water reflecting nothing. She shook her head, thinking exhaustion was playing tricks, and lifted the pot to carry it home. But the crying followed her. It was coming from inside the pot. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs and she set the pot down fast, hands shaking, and peered into the water, and what she saw stopped her breath in her throat. Floating in the pot was a baby, tiny, impossibly small, with soft glowing skin and silver scales where legs should have been, a tail that flickered faintly in the dim light, delicate as silk, and the baby's eyes were open, wide and dark and fixed on her face, and the crying stopped the moment their eyes met. She stared, unable to move, unable to think, her mind trying and failing to make sense of what she was seeing, and then slowly, carefully, like she was reaching into a dream, she slid her hands into the water and lifted the baby out, and the instant the little body pressed against her chest something inside her unlocked, something she'd been holding close for years, and tears spilled down her face hot and fast. "Don't cry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't cry, little one, I have you now, I won't let anything hurt you," and the baby made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and called into her warmth, and for the first time in longer than she could remember she felt something other than emptiness. She wrapped the baby in her headscarf and carried her home, moving quickly through the dark, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it, but the village was still asleep, the hut silent and shuttered, and she slipped inside her own small room and closed the door and laid the baby down on a folded cloth and just looked at her, this impossible, beautiful, glowing thing that had somehow ended up in her hands. The baby gazed back at her and made a sound like laughter, soft and bubbling, and something in that laugh made her chest feel full for the first time in years. "You're mine now," she whispered, and even as she said it, a part of her knew it wasn't true, knew this baby belonged to something else, something older and deeper and far more dangerous than she wanted to think about, but in that moment she didn't care. In that moment the baby was warm and real and hers, and that was enough. She still had to cook that morning, still had to prepare food for the household before the sun came up, and she worked faster than she ever had, her hands steady and sure, and when the family gathered to eat no one spoke to her, no one looked at her, they just ate and left for the fields and she stayed behind with the door closed and the baby in her lap, rocking her gently, humming songs she hadn't sung since she was a child herself. The baby watched her with those wide dark eyes and made soft sounds, and the hours passed like minutes, and for the first time in years she forgot what loneliness felt like. But that night the river started to change. The water stopped flowing. By the next morning the whole village was gathered at the riverbank staring at the place where the current used to run, now just cracked mud and dry stones, and people were shouting, arguing, demanding answers, because the river had never stopped, not in anyone's memory, not even during the worst droughts, and now it was just gone. And with the silence came the crying. At first it was faint, distant, like something carried on the wind from far away, but every night it grew louder, a sound that called through the village like smoke, a woman's voice wailing, raw and endless, and no one could tell where it was coming from, and children started waking up screaming and the elders muttered about spirits and broken oaths, and by the fourth night no one was sleeping anymore. She heard it too, lying awake in the dark with the baby curled against her chest, and she knew, deep in her bones she knew, that the crying was connected to the child she'd taken, but every time she looked down at the baby's face, every time she felt that small warm weight in her arms, the guilt quieted just enough for her to push it away. She told herself it would pass. She told herself the river would come back on its own. She told herself she wasn't hurting anyone. But the village was suffering. Women walked miles to fetch water from distant wells. Crops withered in the fields. Animals died. And the crying got louder. On the fifth morning the village head called an emergency gathering in the square, and everyone came, tired and scared and angry, and the old seer stood in the center with his staff and his white chalk, and his eyes rolled back in his head as he chanted words no one understood, and when he finally spoke his voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "Someone has taken what belongs to the mother of the water," he said, and the crowd went silent. "She will not rest until her child is returned, and if we do not find the thief and return what was stolen, we will all pay the price." The village head's face was hard. "Search every hut," he said. "If you find the child, bring the thief to me, and we will deal with them according to the law." The crowd roared agreement, fists in the air, voices overlapping, and word spread through the village like fire, and by nightfall everyone was talking about the river's stolen child, swearing they'd heard the baby's cries echoing from the water, swearing they'd seen shadows moving near the bank, and she sat in her small room with her hands trembling and the baby in her arms looking up at her with trust so complete it broke her heart. "What do I do?" she whispered, and the baby just laughed softly, reaching for her face, and she knew what she had to do, but the thought of it made her want to scream. That night she made her choice. She sat alone on the floor with the baby cradled against her chest, tears streaming down her face, and she let herself feel everything, the love and the grief and the terrible weight of knowing she was about to lose the only thing that had made her feel alive in years. "You brought me joy," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just the woman no one wanted, and I love you so much, but I can't let them suffer because of me. I can't let children go thirsty because I was selfish, I can't." The baby cooed softly, her little hand wrapping around one of her fingers, and she closed her eyes and held her close and memorized the weight of her, the warmth, the way her breath felt against her skin. Then she stood. She wrapped the baby carefully in the cloth she'd worn on her wedding day, faded now but still beautiful, and she stepped out into the night and walked toward the river, her bare feet silent on the path, the stars overhead cold and distant. The riverbed was empty, cracked and lifeless, but as she stepped onto the dry stones the air began to shift, thickening, and a light started to rise from beneath the ground, soft at first, then brighter, gold and silver mixing together, and the surface of the riverbed began to glow. Then she appeared. The mother of the water rose from the dry earth like a column of living light, tall and terrible and beautiful, her hair flowing like water even though there was no wind, her eyes burning with a light that made the stars look dim, and the ground beneath her feet sparkled as if the river itself was trying to return. She stood frozen, clutching the bundle to her chest, and then she stepped forward, trembling, and held out the baby. "I came to return your daughter," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The water mother glided forward and took the baby gently, cradling her against her chest, and for a long moment she just looked at her child, and then she looked up, and her expression softened. "You fed her," the water mother said, her voice like the current over stones. "You kept her warm. You loved her as if she were your own." Tears spilled down her cheeks but she didn't look away. "She was the only thing that made me feel like I mattered." The water mother's eyes softened further. "The river does not forget kindness," she said, and then she turned and began to sink back into the earth, the baby still in her arms, and the woman watched them disappear, the light fading, the river beginning to flow again, water rising from the cracks in the stones, cool and clear and alive, and she stood there alone in the dark with her arms empty and her heart shattered and the sound of rushing water all around her. The village celebrated. By morning the whole community was gathered at the riverbank, laughing, crying, scooping water into pots, children splashing in the shallows, elders lifting their hands to the sky in thanks, and the strange crying that had haunted them for days was gone, replaced by birdsong and the normal sounds of life returning. Everyone was happy. Everyone except her. She stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, watching, her arms crossed over her chest as if trying to hold herself together, and no one noticed her, no one asked where she'd been or what she'd done, and she walked back to her hut alone and went back to her routine, waking before dawn, fetching water, cooking for a family that didn't speak to her, and the days blurred together again, empty and grey. A month passed. Then one morning she woke feeling strange, heavy, like her body didn't quite belong to her, and when she tried to stand she had to sit back down, dizzy, her stomach turning. Her husband came to her hut for the first time in weeks, annoyed that she hadn't started the cooking yet, and he froze when he saw her lying there pale and shaking. "Get the herbalist," he said to one of the children, his voice sharp, and the old woman arrived quickly, bent and ancient, her hands gnawed but steady as she pressed them gently to her belly, and then she smiled. "There is nothing wrong," the herbalist said, her voice warm. "In fact, this is the best news you could hear. You are carrying a child." "No, not one. Two. Twins." The world went silent. She stared at the old woman, unable to move, unable to breathe, and then the tears came, hot and fast and unstoppable, and she covered her face with her hands and sobbed, great shaking sobs that felt like they would tear her apart, and through the tears she whispered, "The river remembered me." Word spread through the village like wildfire. People who hadn't spoken to her in years came to her door, congratulating her, blessing her, and her husband looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember people saw her again, really saw her, and the months that followed were filled with a quiet joy she thought she'd never feel. Her belly grew round and full and she walked through the village with her head high, and when the time came she gave birth to two perfect babies, a boy and a girl, with skin that glowed and eyes that sparkled like light on water, and everyone who saw them said they'd never seen children more beautiful. Her life changed completely. The small cold hut that had once felt like a prison became warm and full of laughter, and she woke each morning not to silence but to the soft sounds of her baby stirring, reaching for her, and the loneliness that had been her constant companion for years simply disappeared. The other wife, the one who had taken her place, grew quiet, watching from a distance as people who used to ignore the first wife now came to her with gifts and blessings, and even her husband treated her differently, with a respect she hadn't seen since their wedding day. She didn't gloat. She didn't throw it in anyone's face. She just held her children close and thanked the gods silently every night. And sometimes, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, she would carry her twins down to the riverbank and stand at the water's edge, the current flowing smooth and steady, and she would close her eyes and whisper, "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for remembering." And though the river never answered in words, the water always seemed to sparkle a little brighter when she was there, and sometimes she swore she could hear a faint sound like laughter carried on the current, soft and distant, like a child playing somewhere just out of sight. The elders say the river does not forget. They say the water remembers every act of kindness, every sacrifice made without expectation of reward, and it repays those debts in its own time, in its own way. This is the lesson, and it is a lesson worth carrying with you. What you give to the world in love, even when it costs you everything, will return to you tenfold, but only if your heart is pure. Do not take what is not yours, but if something is placed in your path, care for it with everything you have, and when the time comes to let it go with grace. The universe is always watching. The spirits are always listening. And love, real love, the kind that asks for nothing in return, is never wasted. It always comes back. If this story touched you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. The river remembers. Make sure you do too.